Help us to understand others, to learn to cooperate with neighbors and friends, to work together to seek solutions, to learn to compromise, especially when greater good is involved, and to enjoy our work, our study, and play. Give us wisdom to realize that our purpose here involves honesty, charity, and concern for all mankind. Teach us to respect the religious beliefs of others and to respect and promote freedom of thought and expression. Let us live the Rotary four-way test by being fair and truthful with all people at all times. We pray for the day when the world is free from all hatred, racism, and bigotry. But until that day, help us to work together in our own community to make our home peaceful and welcoming place for all of your children. May your blessings rest upon our nation and all its inhabitants. May we all listen and seek your wisdom in this time of unrest and confusion. Please guard and protect our land, our soldiers, our citizens from all danger. Help us to live the words that we pray, and may you bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and us to thy service today. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, Becky. As always, that was beautiful and very timely as well today. With our visiting Rotarians, we've got past President Hal Stevenson.
Afternoon, everyone. We do not have any visiting Rotarians. We might have a few guests here today. If you stand up with your guest, we can bring the microphone around. Anybody?
Carolyn Matthews, my husband John McAllister with John McAllister Realty Consulting is with me here today.
Thank you. I've got a guest today too, Nicole Crook here with the Palmetto Insurance Group. Is that right? There we go. Thank you.
Catherine, would you like to introduce Tammy?
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Davis, and I'm happy to present Tammy Fields, who works with Solicitor Gipson and is my guest today, or our guest today. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Keep coming.
Thank you, Hal. Welcome all of our guests. With health and happiness, we've got John Hayes.
This is health and happiness. Are we all healthy? Are we all healthy? Are we all happy? In the report. I got a message here from Frank Brown. I'm going to read it to you. COVID-19 has affected all of us, but it has been especially hard on seniors living in nursing homes and other assisted living communities. They account for 40% of all U.S. COVID deaths. This ain't happening. That includes at least 15,000 more Americans who have died from Alzheimer's than otherwise would have, according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. Remember the blue bucket on your table and to help us reach new record this year. Make checks out to the CART fund to ensure your contribution is tax deductible. That's from your CART committee. Glenn Matthews, where are you? Stand up. Glenn Matthews is celebrating his 44th birthday today. I'm real proud of that because I can remember how Hal Stevenson. There's a group that is putting together gift certificates to the police officers of Columbia. And he would, if you would see him about making any contributions that you might like to have, and I think it'd be a great cause. And other than that, that's just about it. It's for me. And I can't think of anything else that I would rather be doing than standing here right here with nothing to say. That's my report for the day. And happy all of you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Yes, do remember the blue buckets, and remember to wish Glenn Matthews a happy birthday. Continue to eat, everyone, if you are eating and drinking, but if you are finished, don't forget, masks are required here, so put them on when you're finished, so we can all be safe and everybody will be comfortable being here. I do want to point out a few committee chairs, just in case a lot of people were very good about filling out their surveys, but if I call your name, I want you to just stand up and be recognized so that everybody else in here will know who you are and what specific committee and projects you may be involved in. So for example, President-elect Catherine Davis is in charge of all of our speakers. So if you have speaker ideas, please see Catherine Davis. Birthday boy Glenn Matthews and Blake Buchanan are also in charge of membership. See him. Rotary International Foundation, in your Paula Harris Fellow status, I haven't seen her, but Robin Gorman is in charge of that this year. If you have any questions about that. Newsletter, social media, obviously that's Cynthia Giles, so please see her. We'll go ahead and give you a second stand up. She's also in charge of literacy too. I had you on the list for later on. Greeters, if you are interested in being a greeter and want to talk to Susan Elkins, she's in charge of that. Health and Happiness Coordinator is Wayne Cannon, he is here. So if you want to be on that list, you would appreciate it. Invocations, although Becky Earhart does a beautiful job of her invocations every week, she doesn't need to be doing it every week. So if you'd like to give an invocation, please see Becky Earhart. She may have stepped out. I don't see her across the basis.
She probably went to get lunch.
She probably went to go get lunch, right. Cart Fund, that's duly handled by Frank Brown and Melinda McCoskey. If y'all have any questions about that, thanks for the weekly statements every week. Bocce Ball and Fundraising, Margaret Clarkson, I haven't seen her today. Salvation Army Bell Ringing will be Andy Shane and Chase Heatherly. We'll be getting around to that soon enough. Food packing event. Jonathan Jeffcoat, he's working on that. Coordination with Richland One. Literacy, of course, Cynthia Giles. Scholarship Committee is Kay Shaw. I know some folks are interested in that. I don't know if Kay's here today. And then our Youth Exchange program's kind of on hold. It's in limbo, but it's Alan Robertson. Is Alan here today? Yeah, he's over here in the back. I just wanted to point those folks out because all the work that Rotary does throughout the year is not done from the guy behind the podium. It's everybody out there. Many hands make for light work, and we really appreciate all of y'all jumping in and being involved in those committees that you want to be involved in. Once again, membership is the lifeblood of our organization. We need new members. We'll be doing a Discover Rotary meeting on September 14th here at 11:30. Don't forget to pay your invoices. The board will be meeting next Monday after the meeting, and we'll be discussing finances and a few other things on the agenda at that moment, including new members up for vote. Okay, quickly, we do have a couple minutes. Take 2 minutes for a 30-second introduction of everybody at your table to the other people at your table. 30 seconds per person. Go.
Partly. Then where do you work? I'm not. I met him was it last week? Yes, it was last week. Okay. I also had that hard day. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work for every kind of business. Like if you're trying to sell a book, no one wants to read it. It doesn't matter how much SEO you Yep. Very busy right now. I'm taking good stuff. I work with the commercial business. Parker Poe. Parker Poe, that's right, yeah. We're the same building that we're now. But no, it used to be Oak Table Lounge. Yeah. I used to say it used to be Oak now. It is called. I used to say it used to be Oak Table, like they remember the new ones. I'm sure they appreciate, but I think they just made the menu. I never looked like it. I actually miss Oak Table. They had the best lunch on Sundays, and fall was just kind of like that place to go to meals in the afternoon. Yeah. It's so. I thought Oak Table was expensive. I will try. Motor Supply is my favorite expensive restaurant. Yes. I would have my mom, you know, because she comes down. That's my favorite place to go for anything, because I love how it's like, they can't write the menu based on what they get it, and then they're like, we made a special cocktail to go with the meat today. It's like, yes, that's like, it's like, I'm such a, but not stuffing, it's like a very casual Easter lunch.
That's your vote. That's your vote.
I know. I think 5 months ago.
I hope y'all enjoyed a little bit of getting to know each other at your table. I'd like to do that from time to time. And also to make sure that y'all are not sitting at the same table with the same people all the time. Otherwise, those conversations are going to be very short. So do sit at new tables from now on. I don't think there are any more announcements there that I can think of. So without further ado, we're going to have our own member, Vance Eaton, give the introduction of our speaker today. Vance?
Thank you, President Mason. Before I introduce Solicitor Gipson, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege. Turns out I'm a short timer in my office, as well as here at the Columbia Rotary Club. This is my last meeting, actually. So I'm leaving the county where I've been a violent crimes prosecutor since 2010, and I'm moving to the island of Puerto Rico to be a federal prosecutor. Thank you. I'm glad y'all didn't think it was a joke. I mean, I really am doing this. I've told people it feels like the early onset of a midlife crisis. And I said it to one friend, and she said, well, Vance, not too early. So, Solicitor, I'm sorry to say that for my remaining time in the office, I'll be wearing Hawaiian shirts only as part of my new persona. But I'll be prosecuting gangs down there, and it won't be all beaches, but hopefully I'll do a little surfing as well.
Do you speak Spanish as well as you speak French?
I do speak Spanish. I do. They practice law in federal court down there in English, so. So our speaker today is Solicitor Gipson, my boss. That's Gipson, not Gibson. That guy makes guitars. But Byron E. Gipson became the solicitor of the 5th Circuit on January 9, 2019. Prior to that time, he practiced with the law firm of Johnson, Toll, and Batiste for 21 years in the areas of criminal defense and personal injury. Gipson graduated from the College of Charleston with degrees in English and political science. He later attended the University of South Carolina School of Law. After graduation, Gipson became a law clerk to the Honorable L. Casey Manning, Chief Admin for the 5th Judicial Circuit. In 2000, Gipson was appointed to the South Carolina Humanities Council Board of Directors by Governor Jim Hodges. He was later elected as the chairman of the Humanities Council in September 2004. In 2010, he was appointed by the South Carolina Supreme Court to serve on the member of the South Carolina Bar Foundation and as past chair member of the Municipal Election Commission, He is currently a member of the South Carolina, Richland County National and American Bar Associations, as well as Phi Beta Sigma fraternity and Sigma Pi Phi fraternity. Gipson has previously lectured at numerous legal seminars regarding criminal trials, evidence, and ethics. He's married to Denise Rohr Gipson, and they have 2 children, Caleb. Hear that?
Got it now.
So, I mean, I'll just, before he comes up.
That working?
Check. So, I was in the solicitor's office under the last regime, and this office went through a lot. You may know about it, probably heard about it, but it was a tough time. And, you can't hear back there?
Can't hear.
Cynthia is going to.
Okay, wait, just, wrap up. So, I would just say that throughout that tough time that we had as an office, a lot of people left, and I understood why they left, but I stayed through it. And I just want to say that I did not know Solicitor Gipson that well when he ran, but what I did know was his reputation of being a consummate gentleman and of having uncompromised ethics. The kind of guy you would hand a stack of uncounted money to. The kind of guy that you want in charge of all criminal prosecutions for the capital of the state. So I thank you for running. I thank you for being here to speak to us today. And I just thank the club for having me over here. It's just been really great.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You're all there. First of all, thank you, Lance. That's pretty heartfelt, and I appreciate that. Just knowing it's painful to watch somebody who's as talented and gifted as Vance is with his job to leave us, but I know that this is something that's a passion for him. And knowing that, there's no question that he's going to do a phenomenal job doing all that he does. He's going to bring integrity. He's going to bring just all kinds of smarts and know-how to the job in Puerto Rico. So they're going to be gaining a good one. But just know that you have a family, as I've mentioned before. You've got a family at the Fifth Circuit Solicitor's Office. You'll always be a friend. And who knows, you may want to come back one day. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to come and just share a few thoughts with you about the Solicitor's Office, a little bit about what we do, and just some random musings that go on in my troubled mind sometimes. I'll try to abide by something that my grandmother told my father years ago before he spoke, is you always want to avoid the sensation of making people happy twice. Making them happy to see you stand up and happy to see you sit down. So I'll do my best to make sure that I don't make you happy to see me sit down as well. Can you hear me in the back all right? Yeah. Good? All right. So this is not my first time here. I was here as a guest about roughly 2 years ago when Reese Williams, one of the members, was kind enough to bring me here and introduce me. It was in the infancy stages of my campaign for the Solicitor's Office. And I've known Reese through my service, or our service on the Humanities Councils. And he was kind enough to bring me here to introduce you, so I appreciate that. It's good to stand up here and see some folks who I've admired for years, like Judge Anderson, who's sitting out there. I see Mr. Tata, who our children were in school together for years, and I believe still are. When school starts back at some point in some way, shape, or form, that may be virtual, but however it is, they'll see one another. And just others of you who I've admired, Mrs. Davis, who I've admired for years and seen the work that you do and that your spouses do. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today. So in the next hour and a half or so that I've been allotted to speak, I got some life out of you. No, in the next few moments, just want to share a few things with you amidst the groans, and hopefully I don't exacerbate putting you to sleep since you just had this wonderful lunch from Seawells. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, what is a solicitor and what are you about to sell me? That's one of the most frequent questions that I get. So I'll start just at that level and explain to you this. The solicitor is just an old term, an English term, that means district attorney. It means state's attorney. It means prosecutor. They are all one and the same. So I'm the prosecutor for the 5th Judicial Circuit, which includes Kershaw County and Richland County. There's 16 of us that are elected throughout the state, so I'm one of the 16. And generally the way that the statute works is there are as few as 2 counties or as many as 5 counties. So some solicitors have as many as 5 counties down in the lower part of the state, which would be maybe Jasper, Beaufort, Allendale, Hampton, and Cullinan County. Or here where we have a larger mass of people, I have Richland and Kershaw counties. My job is to oversee the prosecution of all I almost said federal as I looked over Judge Anderson, state felony matters, that happen in general, what we call general sessions court, but state felony matters that happen here in some classified misdemeanors. So the benefit is that I have 36 lawyers between the 2 offices that help us do that. Out of those 36 lawyers, we have staff that assist them, probably about 120 staff members between the 2 offices. And they're busy all of the time. They do things such as managing court appearances. So when criminal defendants are charged with crimes, they have to manage the court appearances, meaning having them come in and out of the courthouse, pre-COVID, of course, coming in and out of the courthouse, and ensuring that the docket is controlled properly. They control our trial dockets. They produce evidence to defense lawyers. That's an extremely important job that they have because, and just to put that into context a little bit, anytime an arrest happens, there's an investigation that takes place or should have taken place. And in that investigation, officers will compile information, whether or not it's witness statements, whether it's pictures, whether it's body camera information, whether it's just ballistics information that has to be tested by an agency, whether it's SLED or otherwise, whether it's DNA evidence, all of those things have to be compiled. Once they're compiled, they're turned over to our office, and we have to turn that information over to the defense attorney or to the defendant. That's called the discovery process. That's crucial because anybody who's charged with a crime is innocent until proven guilty. And they have to have the right to look at all of that information so that they can make determinations about whether or not they may want to trial or whether or not they may want to try to work on a plea of some sort. And they are entitled to know all of that information. So it falls on our office to produce that information in a timely manner, or else there can be dire consequences, meaning dismissal of the case. And so that's one of the things that our office is tasked with, and when you have that many people who are working with us, that many lawyers, that many staff, which include paralegals, victims advocates, investigators of our own. They include counselors, they include receptionists, they include many other roles that people have. We all have to be working in lockstep to make sure that we're doing our job before we even get to a courtroom, producing information, properly investigating matters, and properly handling the business of the 5th Circuit. Those are things we have to do on a daily basis before we can even make an attempt to step into the courtroom. And one of the other pieces we have is there's something called an ELA phone that Vance has become highly knowledgeable about. That's what we call the Emergency Legal Assistance Phone. And that phone circulates between all 36 of our assistant solicitors and our deputies as well from time to time. And that's a phone that law enforcement uses. It usually happens between the hours of about 1 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. when they call you to ask you a question about something that they have just experienced to make sure that what they're doing is proper. So what's the latest call? What's the normal time for your calls, Vance?
Oh, if I'm not in bed, I'm not getting a call.
It's usually in bed and it's usually on the weekends. But you get those calls, and we need those calls because that allows us to properly advise law enforcement about what they're doing, what they're seeing, and to make sure that they're doing their job properly. Because if they do their job properly, it gives us an opportunity to prosecute the best that we can and make the best decisions that we're able to make. We also have something that's called, well, let me tell you the one other thing. There's a misnomer that goes on that prosecutors' job, and you see this oftentimes in some of the different court dramas that you watch, but the misnomer is that our job is to seek convictions. And nothing could be farther from the truth. I'll say that again, nothing could be farther from the truth. Our job is to seek justice. And actually the mission of our office is to fairly and diligently prosecute the cases in the Fifth Circuit as ministers of justice. So we are truly ministers of justice. It is up to us to look at cases and make decisions, sometimes extremely hard decisions, to determine whether or not a case needs to go forward or if it needs to take a different pathway. That pathway can be trial, which of course you see those things on TV all the time. It can be sometimes working on what we call a plea offer, meaning negotiating with the defense because there may be weaknesses in the case, or there may be reasons why a person needs to be looked at slightly differently. Maybe it's their background, maybe it's their age, maybe it's some type of deficiency that they may have that we feel in our expertise after looking at the case and studying all the information that we need to make a different decision that will not impact the trial. And quite frankly, there's no possible way to try all of the cases that come through our system because, and you'll hear this from me again, we receive about 190 warrants per week. And if you put that into the equation with the fact that we've not held in-person court since March 15th of this year, you can imagine what those numbers will do to a docket. And so, as we say, it's our job to fairly and diligently prosecute cases. You also have to remember the other side of the spectrum is that a person who is charged with the crime and who comes in and says, hey, I didn't do this thing, I'm innocent of this crime, they have a right to a trial. And they have a right to have a trial in a more speedy manner than sometimes we can produce it. And that's one of the challenges that we have as prosecutors, to try to diligently work through these things so that we're not unfairly burdening somebody who's been charged, but also making sure that we're preserving their rights, their constitutional right to have a speedy trial. We're able to do that, number one, again, as we look through these cases. I talked about trials, but we also have what we call diversionary programs. And we've handed some of these things out to you. I think it was Cynthia put some of these matters out on your table, some of these pamphlets. And it talks about some of the things our office does. As we look at cases, sometimes you'll see that there may be a veteran who's had an issue of some sort of been charged with a crime, sometimes somebody who's got a mental health challenge, sometimes somebody who's got drug challenges. We have programs where if a person, first of all, accepts responsibility, then they can receive treatment in those courts, and then we'll look at their charges a little bit differently after they've received the treatment that they need. One of the important things is that when people are charged with crimes, that they go back into the community at some point in time after they've accepted responsibility in those cases where they were responsible, and they receive the treatment that they need. It does very little good to keep releasing people back into the community who have some type of challenge if we've not tried to meet the challenge while they were under our jurisdiction. So we work hard in our office to try to do that. We have pretrial intervention programs, which is for first-time offenders. You know, sometimes kids will do something silly. We've all sinned and fallen short. We've stubbed our toe. But pretrial intervention gives people the opportunity to do community service, learn a little bit about what they did and why they did it, and then have some charges, minor charges, expunged from their records so they don't follow them for the rest of their lives. We have alcohol education programs, traffic education programs, and other programs as well. But that's just a little bit of the spectrum of what we do. But our job is to be ministers of justice at all times and to work hard to ensure that we are protecting the Fifth Circuit and doing our job to the best of our abilities. As you know, we don't live in a vacuum, and our job has gotten a little bit more difficult in the last 6 or so months. People have lost a little bit of trust in public officials. They've lost trust in the ability of the criminal justice system to handle the business that it needs to handle on a daily basis. And I suggest to you that the erosion of that public trust is sometimes earned, because sometimes we've not done the things that we need to do and done them properly. And so what we have to do is on a daily basis rebuild that trust so that people know if we stand before you, if we come before you, that we're doing it because we've done the homework, we've done the work, and that we're doing it because it is the right thing to do. I'm sure that all of you have been in a situation in the last 6 or so months where people have come to you and said, you know, we're living in interesting times. I'm sure you've probably got tired of hearing it phrased that way. We're living in interesting times. We're living in challenging times. We're living in troubling times. You put in the word about the times that we're living in. You hear that all the time. And I suppose it is true. All of those words are true. Interesting, challenging, conflicting, all of the words that you can come up with. I'm sure John Monk can give you about 10 or 12 others. But I suppose it's true. And I can certainly say in my 49 years on this earth, I don't think there's been a convergence of this much major life-altering event, this many life-altering events that have happened in this short period of time, at least in my lifetime, that it's not been that way. Think about it. Number one, you have COVID-19, the pandemic, the elephant in the room that we've all talked about. We've got the economic downturns that have happened as a result of COVID-19. We've got the racial and social injustices that we're dealing with on a daily basis. And by the way, if you haven't checked, it's actually an election year. So you put all of those things together and there comes to be this perfect storm of sorts that's out there. And as I try to talk to people who are a little bit wiser than me, which isn't very hard to do, if you to ask my 13-year-old daughter, she'd say she's been wiser than me for at least 10 years. But if you talk to folks, they'll try to point you to the year of 1968, because it's a year minus the pandemic where you had similar types of transitions that were happening. You know, just going back and looking at history, the Vietnam War was really through the Tet Offensive, took a different turn in 1968. In April of 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. In June of 1968, Robert Kennedy was running for president. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. I'm trying to think of the other things that popped to my mind. The unrest at the Democratic Convention that took place in Chicago was in 1968. You had the Mexico City Olympics in 1968, where two Olympic athletes raised a fist in protest against some of the social injustices that were happening at the time. And they were essentially banned from the sport for a period of time. That was 1968, simply 3 years before I was born. And in my English background, I like to kind of go back and research a little bit and look at stuff. And there's a poet that I came across who I was aware of. Her name is Nikki Giovanni. And she can be very caustic in what she says about society and the things that she sees. And in 1968, she wrote a poem called For Sandra. And she wrote this poem because her friend Sandra, it's a very short poem, I'm not going to read it in here, but it's a very short poem, and what she said is that her friend Sandra always looked at her because she just thought she was just mean and hateful and spiteful and just never saw any joy in anything. And so in true Nikki Giovanni fashion, she, in very few words, kind of sliced and diced her friend Sandra with love. And she started by saying, you know, I wanted to write a green tree poem, but I looked outside of my window and realized that there were no trees in Manhattan because it was all covered with cement. She talks about wanting to write about blue skies, but because of the election and the political strife that was going on, there was no blue sky to see. She talked about being a little bit more of a revolutionary and picking up arms. But what she ultimately came to is that she talked about all of the things she wanted to do in writing a beautiful poem. She ended by saying, perhaps these are not poetic times at all. She said, perhaps these are not poetic times at all. And I submit to you that that poem could have been written 2 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. Because as we look around, we can all say in one way, shape, or form, perhaps these are not poetic times at all. If you turn on your preferred news station, whether it be WIS or WLTX or whether it's Fox or CNN, doesn't matter. If you watch long enough, perhaps you'll determine that these are not poetic times at all. Perhaps if you turn on sports talk, like I used to try to do when I was driving a good bit and still do probably too much. What you'll see here is the football seasons are being canceled. We can't have football season. Baseball, this team has come down with a strike of COVID-19, so they can't play, and the Cardinals can't do this, and the Pirates are not able to do this. You'll hear those things. So maybe you'll start to determine we can't have that escape through sports like we would normally have, because the fall seasons are canceled. They're not going to be any championships. Williams-Brice is going to be riding like it used to. And then we may determine perhaps these are not poetic times at all. We look at the fact that school is going to be virtual now. And our children, again, I have a 15 and a 13-year-old, may not be able to attend class. They may have to do it virtually. They'll be in and out of school again like they were at the end of last year. Perhaps they're not poetic times at all. Or you may turn and you may look at our office and what we do. And I can tell you that last year alone, In my first year there, we cleared 51 murder cases. 51. But since year 2020, January 1st of 2020, 27 new murder cases have come through Richmond County. Or if you want to get even happier news, I'm being cynical. Since August 10th of last year, meaning last Monday, if we go from August 10th of last year to August 10th of this year, we've had 46 new murders in Richmond County. So I submit to you, maybe perhaps these are not poetic times at all. Or if you look at the fact that we moved 11,000 cases last year, but since we have not been able to have in-person court, although we do virtual courts, our docket numbers are higher than they've ever been. And I submit to you that perhaps they're not poetic times at all, especially when you look at the fact that 190 new warrants come through each week. But I'd also submit to you this, that these are extremely challenging times. But when you have a challenge like this, you also have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to reshape your thoughts, to reshape this country, to reshape this state, to reshape this city and this county. We have an idea to reimagine what the idea of America is. To reimagine the concept of what a beautiful country this is. We've got to learn to embrace the rose with all of its thorns as well. And I submit to you that perhaps these truly are poetic times. We've got to change the paradigm by altering our mindset. In these interesting times and these challenging times, it's leaders like you guys in this room right now, like everybody in this room, who will have the opportunity to reimagine this city through the lens of what Rotary clubs internationally stand for. When people approach you with commentary that's negative or that's tilted one way or another, use that prism, use that filter that you talked about even at the beginning of this meeting. Number one, is it the truth? Two, is it fair to all persons concerned? Three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? If you alter the mindset that you have, ultimately the mindsets of those around you will be altered as well to a more positive place. I believe it was John Milton that said, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make heaven of hell or hell of heaven. That comes from Paradise Lost. That was written back in maybe 1620s or something like that. Somewhere around in there, maybe a little bit earlier, but any English scholars right here don't hold me to that. But the mind in itself can make a hell out of heaven or heaven out of hell. And so we have the mindset to determine that, and as leaders, we need to be the ones who make the narrative. Stop letting the narrative come to us, but we can create the narrative. And if we're troubled by what we're seeing and what we're hearing, create your own narrative. You know, as a Boy Scout, I was a Boy Scout for years and had the blessing of becoming an Eagle Scout. What they taught us early on is that a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. That's a mindset. And if you carry that mindset, those around you will begin to carry that mindset as well. If it's a virus, let it be a good virus. Let the good things that you see and how you look at the world and how you treat people and handle people, let that infect people. And if it does that, I can assure you that we'll be in a better place this time next year than we are this year. I suggest to you that these are poetic times, and I suggest to you that they're poetic times for several reasons. But I leave you with this. The word perhaps is an adverb. Nikki Giovanni said perhaps. These are not poetic times at all. So perhaps, the word perhaps is an adverb, and my recollection of an adverb is it modifies verbs. So what I'm suggesting to you is our challenge is to choose your verb and modify it. Change it just a little bit so that it fits the narrative of what we as leaders need to be doing, what we as leaders must be doing. Use that word perhaps, and perhaps you'll listen better. Perhaps you'll use your 2 eyes and 2 ears for a reason. As I tell my kids all the time, the Lord gave us 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth for a reason. So that you watch more, you listen more, and you talk less. That applies to me. as I see my time dwindling down. I'm about to watch and listen more, and I'm about to talk a whole lot less. But I suggest to you, if we listen more, we'll make more reasonable conclusions. Perhaps we'll empathize more. Perhaps we'll criticize less. Perhaps if we do these things in a year, perhaps we'll be in a better place. I'm hopeful. Your presence in this room suggests that you are hopeful as well. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for your prayers. We ask for your prayers. We ask for wisdom every day because we truly need it. And thank you for entertaining me and allowing me to be here for a few minutes. So I hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope I didn't get the snores going too well. But I appreciate the fact that you entrusted me with an opportunity to speak to you today. Yes, sir.
Solicitor, recently saw where a man who supposedly killed his girlfriend and been in prison for 2 years without trial was released on bond, $350,000 bond. I guess he paid $15,000 or somebody did. And he shot 2 deputies over in Richland County. Now, did that crime and murder happen in Richland County?
Yes, sir.
And if so, why wasn't he prosecuted long before the judge had to release him so he could go out there and shoot the sheriff's deputies?
And one caveat, I'll tell you, I can't comment too deeply on pending cases, but what I can say is that unfortunately, what happened is unfortunate, and the blessing is that the officers lived through that. The saddest part about it is, as I mentioned to you with those numbers, we're working hard. We have over 140 pending murder cases, and that's one that was on the docket to be tried in time, but there are others that were older. And so unfortunately, when a bond is set, a person there's a question that a judge has to answer when bonds are set, whether or not a person is a flight risk, whether they're a danger to the community. And if they meet that standard, then they're entitled to a bond. Whether it means there are restrictions that include house arrest, electronic monitoring, things of that nature. What I can tell you is that it's an unfortunate situation, and all of us are mad and angry that happened. But that speaks to the fact that we need more resources so we can move these matters faster. When you have 190 cases coming a week, those that are older, there's a line and they go through those lines, and we pair through those as fast as we can. We have an average caseload of about 300 or so cases per prosecutor, and that still only scratches the surface of what we truly need in order to make the system work the way it needs to work. So there's no excuse for that ever happening, but I can tell you that when it comes time to come to court, we're going to be ready. We make no excuses, no apologies for what we need to do, and we're going to do it to the best of our ability. But the blessing is that those officers are okay. Yes, sir.
My question is, when a crime is committed, what determines whether it's a county or state crime versus a federal crime? And if they're both prosecuted, which state's president?
What determines if it's a county crime or a federal crime is, depending on where it happens, the jurisdiction. The county is always going to have some say-so over a case because it's going to happen in some county. But there are certain types of crimes that federal jurisdiction is better. It's more efficient, quite frankly. I mean, Judge will tell you that, Judge Anderson will tell you that it's more efficient. For instance, things that cross, if there's a postal issue, things crossing state lines, it affects interstate commerce. Oftentimes, if you're talking about gun crimes, because gun manufacturers are often in different states, although we have some local ones. If bullets had to travel across state lines, that could become federal. If there was any type of transmission that took place, wire transmission, there are times that those can be picked up federally. The weights of drugs sometimes determine whether or not something can be taken federally. We are in constant contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we have ways of looking at cases through data and seeing, which crimes have been committed by which, persons, and determining if those are ones that will be better handled on the federal side, and we do that.
Can you be prosecuted in both courts?
You can be prosecuted in both courts. You can have cases pending concurrently with both courts. And so that happens quite a bit. That does happen quite a bit. Yes,
One of the things that we hear about within the criminal justice system is sort of the role of prisons and looking at, things like rehabilitation versus punishment versus retribution. And a lot of times you hear about how different countries, view prisons or maybe do differently. So I just wanted to hear sort of briefly your thoughts on the role of prison and kind of the goal.
The question of the role of prisons and kind of my thoughts about that. Prisons are necessary. It's hard to say. I'll tell you a brief anecdote. Somebody asked me probably about 3 or 4 days ago as a law student, and they asked me what my one of the things I remembered best in law school, what the best lesson, the biggest lesson for me was. And I'll tell you, I was driving at the time, he was my managing partner at the time, but I was a law student, and I was clerking for him, I.S. Levy Johnson. And I was driving him around the state to different places and carrying his briefcase and just kind of picking his brain when he wanted to talk about legal matters. And there was a day I had to drive to Lake City to go sign up a client and go talk to them because he was going to hire the law firm. Again, I was carrying briefcases, I was a clerk. And when I walked in that jail for the first time in my life, I was probably 24 years old, those jail doors were shut behind me. And everything in me puckered at that point because I realized, and I apologize for being a little bit too, but everything puckered because I realized I was not walking out of there until somebody let me out. And I was just in there to go, to get some paperwork signed and to go talk to somebody and come back out. And so there's a piece there. Our culture is so quick to talk about retribution and what we should have. And, for Christians, there is an Old Testament, there's a New Testament, but I'm a believer, you have to take responsibility in what you do. When you violently hurt somebody, when lives are lost, there are places for us to throw the book at people. But when people are in jail, there should be something more that's going on there than just them sitting in a cell, almost like sitting in a kennel. You should be stimulating the mind, and the prayer is that people can learn a little bit and maybe pick up, a trade, learn some things so that when they come out, they'll be better suited for the time they serve. There are metrics that say after a certain period of time, generally the penalty has been paid and a lesson has been learned, but people do need to have an opportunity to learn while they're back there because in most crimes, they're not the most violent types. People are coming back. They're going to reintegrate in our communities. And if we've done ourselves a disservice, if we've not trained and educated and tried to fill the voids that were there before they went, imagine one of my favorite movies is Shawshank Redemption. It's dark, but it's got some beautiful tones in it. Came out in 1994. But just imagine 20 years ago, you didn't have an iPhone or Samsung, whatever platform you use, you didn't have that. There were no flat screen TVs. Just the internet was there, but it wasn't what it is now. If you were tucked away for 20 years and you come back, there's really no way that you're going to be able to reintegrate yourself into the population. I had a young kid, I was probably in 1998, he was 15 years old, he was 16 years old at the time, and he got out of jail. It was Christmas time, and he was able to get out a little bit earlier. He was on the juvenile side. And I went to pick him up from Manning, South Carolina. He'd only been in jail for about 2 years. I say only because it wasn't me. He'd only been there 2 years. I picked him up. We stopped at the Western Sizzler on I-95 to get lunch. And so I'm sitting there ordering, on my menu, ordering food. And I looked at him, and he's just kind of had a look in his eyes like, I don't know what the heck I'm going to order. I'm going to just have what you were having. He had gotten so used to people telling him what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, in that 2 years, that he just had really lost the capacity in that 2 years to order. And so there's a place for retribution, let me not say retribution. There's a place for rehabilitation, there's a place for punishment, and that all has to happen, but I think we can be wiser about how we train and what we do. Yes, sir.
Solicitor Gipson, how sophisticated are our crime investigations here? We have a pretty state of the art. We have to rely on other resources primarily.
We do well. There's always room for improvement. We have different metrics that can tell you now. We can look now and there are databases that if a gun has been fired, obviously I won't say obviously. If it's an automatic weapon, there's a shell casing. And you can trace those shell casings and have the data from that shell casing housed. And at some point in time, match it up with another gun if you have other shell casings around there, and the gun produces itself, years later. They can sometimes tie it into one crime. There are things that you hear Chief Holbrook talk about shot spotters. So in certain areas of the city, if shots are fired, it's a certain decibel level. So instead of waiting on people to call, you can have law enforcement that gets there quicker, and it affects more arrests. It affects better data being collected, just better investigations. DNA, the science of DNA is just by leaps and bounds every year getting better. So we do okay. We can always do better. A lot of that comes down to funding, and so when you start talking about funding, you start talking about tax dollars. So there are grants out there that the sheriff's departments use. We use, and our office is trying to share information with other solicitors' offices. So if you have people that are going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction committing crimes, that we can find out quicker, and we can put our eyes on them quicker and bring people to justice quicker than we have. So technology is helping us be more efficient with our jobs, but we can always do a better job.
Do you know how many percentage of the people that were arrested in the civil unrest were not from South Carolina or not from Columbia? And was there any indication that the violence was organized?
Those are pending cases at the moment, so maybe if I'm invited back, I can give you a little bit better data, but there is information to suggest that what you said is true, that people were coming from other jurisdictions. There are people here who did some things that should have been done, but there's a thought process that there was more organization as well. Yes.
I know it's on hold for a while, but could you discuss the drug court? Because I know it's a wonderful thing you all do.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about it? I just heard about it.
I can. Our drug courts are, excuse me. It's one of those, it's not a diversionary program, but I handed a pamphlet out. It's a program where it allows us to defer sentencing in the case. So that if there's a person who meets the metrics, they've had drug issues and sometimes diagnoses of some type, similar to our mental health courts. If they're a good candidate, then what happens is they can plead to an actual charge, receive, and sentencing is deferred for a period of time. But part of that sentence means they have to receive counseling over a period of time, and they have to adhere to the counselor's recommendations. And if they do all of the things that they're supposed to do, then when they come out on the other side, meaning finishing all of those things, then we can work with those charges. Sometimes if it's a minor enough charge, it can be expunged. But the key is that they've gotten the help that they needed by accepting responsibility and being in a structured program that our office supervises and our circuit court judges will supervise as well.
On that same subject, I noticed in this, it did not say anything on the alcohol side related to all of the related to DUI. Does that still give an opportunity to go through?
DUI, we have a DUI court, but that happens with the second offense. So first offense is there's not a diversionary program for the first offense, but if there's a second offense, then DUI courts will require an ignition interlock device, alcohol counseling, and things of that nature. And then that would allow them, once they finish, to, it would still be on their record as a DUI, but it would be a lesser DUI. So there is something for a DUI, but not for a DUI first.
Okay.
Yeah, DUI first is a misdemeanor, second is a felony. Correct, and oftentimes, you have ADSAP programs and things that are built into the DUI first, that if a person receives that, there's some counseling they can receive as they're getting their license back. So that's in place, just based on what the statute is. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here and educating us on everything that this circuit is doing. Vance, thank you for your years of service here in the community and also our club. I'm sure, I talked to Vance when he said he was going to be leaving, and I said there's probably a Rotary Club in Puerto Rico too, so hopefully he'll have some time to join a Rotary Club down there as well. We will end, Catherine Davis, we don't know.
I'm pending right now because our presenters really want to present virtually. So we're going to either have to discuss that in our board meeting and get to a decision. You can still congregate here perhaps, but we got to significant speakers that all of you would love to hear, just cannot, will not come out and do an in-person presentation, but they'll be happy to do it virtually, so.
We don't know who the speaker is this next week.
I kind of do, but I'm not going to say it because they can be one or the other, and I'm
Okay.
not wanting to be wrong, so I'm just going to tell you that hopefully it'll be someone you'll find of significant interest, one for sure and one for sure. So.
Okay, we look forward to hearing that. All right, we'll take us out in song.